Sentire Media.
I believe that it is possible to indicate a list of characteristics that are typical of what I would like to call eternal fascism. It is still around, sometimes in civilian clothes. It would be so comforting if someone came onto the world scene and said, "I would like to reopen Auschwitz. I want the black shirts to march once again on parade in the Italian squares." Unfortunately, life is not that easy. Fascism can still return under the most innocent of guises. Our duty is to unmask it and to point it out in each of its new forms. Every day, in every corner of the world. Umberto Eco. When starting a series on fascism, we must first define exactly what we are talking about. What does the word fascism mean? Well, the word comes from fascio, which was basically a bundle of rods or sticks. So in English you could translate it into fasces or bundle. In a certain sense you could say that fascism as a synonym could be bundleism or something like that. It was a term coined by Benito Mussolini, the founding father of fascism. The symbol itself, that of a bundle of sticks or rods, goes back to Etruscan times, then inherited by the Romans and even the ancient Greeks. You could also find an axe in the middle of this bundle, and it became a symbol of magisterial power, the power of life or death over those who were being judged. It is a symbol, the fascio, that doesn't have the same stigma perhaps as the swastika, which is now associated with absolute evil. Indeed, we can find the fascio all over the world, even in the American Congress or in other European countries. To help me define fascism, I've called in Matteo Marconi. So, Matteo, thank you very, very much, first of all, for coming and being the co-host for this mini-series on fascism.
Ciao a tutti.
And so, Matteo, you've always said something that I've liked very much about fascism and in our attempt to define fascism, and that is it was a movement that was action before ideology. So there's sort of a big difference between maybe communism, that was an ideology that then was put in practice with various tragic results. Here we have something that is not born as an ideology, but then becomes one after the action.
There is no fascism without Benito Mussolini because he is the father of an idea which was a movement in some way. He began as a socialist, then it turned out to be a nationalist. He supported war, then he was a pacifist in some way. Then in some way he looked around what useful for his ideas or for his purpose, and then he fixed them these things about what was much more important for him. So we don't have a beginning for fascism, an ideal, a book or a ideology.
Yeah, we don't have a handbook, let's say, for fascism.
No, we have a man picked around ideas everywhere and took what he needed to go forward, to have success, to succeed, to command. And at the end, we have an ideology at the end of this process. But in the beginning, there was some kind of chaotic ideas mixed all together, a patchwork of ideas that was not static. Then he picked the things he needed and created something new. But at the beginning, we had nothing. We had only Benito Mussolini, who wanted to to rule, wanted
We wanted to reach, and we wanted to reach power and
power, reach
maintain
power for
power.
itself, power for itself
Hmm.
at the beginning. Then fascism came later. In the beginning, as you said, there was at the beginning we had only action before an ideology. We had just a man, a single man who wanted to rule. Then we had when he saw when he chose the right things he needed, then we had fascism, which is a strong belief, but it's in, at the end it becomes strong at the end. But in the beginning we had nothing, just a man who wanted to rule.
So, would it be correct to say then that we couldn't have defined fascism until fascism was over, basically?
Yes, I think this is really correct. This is a paradox, but in the beginning, to define fashion, we had to do a sort of personality test about
Yeah, an
what
aptitude test for.
Benito Mussolini was and where he was born, what were their personal ideals, on who was his father,
Yeah, and we'll
where he
talk
was
about
born.
that in episode 2. So we'll trace his early life in
In the
episode 2.
beginning, it's a psychological profiling. If we want to talk about fascism,
Exactly.
then we can talk about fascism. But in the beginning, we have Benito Mussolini.
So we can say first action, psychological profiling, and then we can
Then,
speak of an
correct,
ideology
correct.
later.
Yes, I think we have, in fact, the real fascism. I think in Italy, it neo-fascism who came
After
after
Mussolini.
the Second World War, after fascism was defeated, and the real ideology was built after he was dead. And we have a structure for neo-fascism, which is in Italy, which in Italy has have had a long life from 1945 until now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And now there's a fascist ideology, but I think before he it collapsed, we cannot define really what we can do something, we can provide something, but in the end, the fascism came out in the end. What?
Exactly. And that's a fascinating concept. The paradox that you can only start to define fascism as an ideology after the death of Benito Mussolini. So
Yes,
that's
after that we we just have a complete look what happened, and we can say what it was and what it is because it's still
yeah, fascism is a label that is now used
everywhere.
everywhere. Yes, not a
Worldwide label,
yeah.
worldwide brand. It's just like a brand and commercial brand. It's worldwide known. Everyone who want to use fascism as a brand knows what to pick and to choose to apply to a
from
single
that experience.
that experience.
Okay, well, let's try now that we are at a certain distance, historical distance from the first manifestation of fascism, the fascism of Mussolini. And so I mentioned in the intro, Matteo, this symbol il fascio, so the bundle, the bundle of sticks with the axe. Tell us something about the history of il fascio, of this symbol, of this object, if we will.
Mussolini was a very intelligent person. He
A
was a
cultured
coach.
person, we could say.
Yes, he was a teacher, and he knew what to say and when to say things. Fascio Littorio, which is the symbol of judiciary power in the ancient Rome. It means jus vitae ac necis in English, the will and the power to kill or to save a person in a trial. And it was used to show strength in numbers because the axis, which is in the center
Of the
of the
bundle, yeah.
bundle, means the power, but the bundle means the number of people who collect
Yeah.
together and are powerful. It was used in the uh, um, French Revolution as a symbol. And it's not that. I think Benito Mussolini was quite intelligent because he chose a symbol which was very common and it was not a negative symbol. And at the beginning, you you do not see this symbol as evil. It was
Well, I mean, if you think about the meaning in itself, it's a good meaning. I mean, there is strength in numbers because the idea is that one stick or one rod alone can easily be broken, whereas if you have a bundle, it's more difficult to break it. So, strength in numbers.
and so it had this meaning that is quite similar to socialist ideals because Mussolini began as a socialist, and strength in numbers, I think, is quite an lefty idea.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
anyway,
it's a left-wing idea. Yeah, yeah.
at the end of the fascism, he came back to his maybe for some reason not so pure. He came back to his original ideals of socialism, and we had at the end of the fascism we had a sort of lefty fascism, social fascism
Yeah, yeah.
in the Repubblica Sociale.
Yeah, indeed, the Social Republic, La Repubblica Sociale, was the sort of the puppet regime that was set up by the Nazis after 1943.
Yes. So in the beginning, this kind of Imagine was a very intelligent brand. Imagine a very intelligent choice for customers.
Yeah. It was good. It was good branding. It was good marketing
Yes,
at the beginning.
because in Italy in that period we had lots of revolts and from workers, from industries, and so it was a sort of a symbol which collected together lots of people with different ideas, from left to right. He moved together the veterans with the socialists, with the farmers, and I think in the beginning his idea was to get more people as possible from left or right.
It didn't matter where they
didn't
came
matter.
from, as long as they
This is
subscribed to
yes,
his idea.
this was the good beginning, the good symbol for a beginning of what it didn't know.
Yeah, indeed, the very first, and then we'll talk about this as we move through our analysis of the birth of fascism. He started off with combat groups, I fasci di combattimento, so these fascist combat groups, which collected a lot of ex-veterans of the First World War, and we'll talk about the vittoria mutilata, the mutilated victory, and a lot of the propaganda that Mussolini used at the beginning. But let's stick for the moment with our attempts to define fascism, to give a definition of fascism, at least the fascism of Mussolini to begin with. I know, Matteo, that you often talk about the way in which Umberto Eco tried to give a definition of fascism in his book Eternal Fascism. What attempts did Umberto Eco make to try and define fascism?
He tried to fix some eternal characteristic of fascism.
Some permanent characteristic.
Permanent characteristic of fascism. In a small book you can find easily everywhere. It's taken from a lesson he held in Columbia University in the 80s, I think. And he tried to fix the more important characteristic of fascism. And there are a few. The list is very, very simple because the hatred toward minority.
So hate towards minorities.
Hate toward elites, which is quite strange because you hate minorities and you hate elites. So you hate everyone.
Yeah.
There is a celebration of death instead against a life which is static. You have to do action for action itself, action in war, action against the enemy, because the enemy is the most important thing in fascism. You have to have an enemy. If you don't have an enemy, you must build him.
Yeah, you must create the
Create
enemy,
it,
yeah.
because you don't create an enemy. You cannot have a fashion. You cannot have nationalism in particular, and yet towards elite and elite as a cultural elite, political elite, democracies. And there is a something which is very intelligent, I think, in fascism, because is a strong um, recall for people who is frustrated from
Hmm.
life.
Yeah, it collects these frustrated people
You
who.
cannot, your life is ruined, is going to hell. You did not what you wanted to do.
Hmm.
But fascism shows you if something happened in your life wrong, it's not your fault. There is an enemy. There is a strange
A
uh,
foreign agent
foreign
or
agent
a
or
minority or
a
somebody to
minority
blame or.
or Bilderberg who's
Mm.
working, behind you, and and so whatever happens to you is due to something which you have to fight. It's not your fault at the end. And this is a very strong.
Which is a wonderful message for somebody who instead, is in a frustrated period of their life and they don't know how to get out of it. The message, it's not your fault. Come with me and we'll get the ones who are to blame for your current
Yeah.
condition is a wonderful message for people who want to get out of their situation.
And so the creation of the enemy, I think this is the more strong idea of fascism. And the creation, another thing very important is the creation of a nation, of a nationalism. In Italy, it's quite strange because it's when Benito Mussolini came out, Italy was a very young nation,
Absolutely.
very divided in regions,
Yeah,
and
we have to consider that when Mussolini was born, Italy had only been created 30 years before his birth, let's say. The idea of a united Italy. Before that, you didn't have Italians, but you had Tuscans, you had Milanese, you had Neapolitans, and so on and so forth. So he created an idea of Italy in a certain sense.
And so he created the an idea of Italy. He created Italians, and by creating an enemy, uh, these things are connected. I think you cannot create a nation without creating an enemy. I think he created an enemy, then he created Italy, because Italy without an enemy was not an appealing idea. I think.
At the time, yeah, you needed someone to kick out of the country or someone to fight to be able to create that country, let's say.
The enemies were the United States, the England, corrupted parliamentary regime
Systems, yeah, yeah.
system. Sorry,
Yeah, we must remember that Mussolini had great contempt for parliamentary systems, even though he strove to be elected in the parliament, and as we speak, the 100th anniversary of the elections, which saw the first fascist delegates in the parliament, was a regular election. So he did participate in the electoral process.
as Hitler did. They used democracy to get the power. Then they decided this was a corrupted system. They put contempt against this system, who was very important for their election at the beginning.
So, in trying to define fascism, we've mentioned action for action's sake, the creation of an enemy, an external or internal enemy, a contempt for democracy and democratic processes. What else can we say? How else can we define fascism? Action for action's sake is a good definition, I think, as well. And in this attempt to find a post-fascism definition of fascism.
Action for itself, because in that period we had a cultural movement. In literature, we had decadentism. And
And also
we
futurism was an
futurism
important influence in fascism as well.
we had futurism whose motto was let's kill the moonlight. Futurism just celebrated war as a kind of regeneration. So it was action for itself. Just destroy to build something new, but destroyed without,
Without substituting anything.
yes, without an idea. War for itself, because the war is the regeneration of the ancient values who had to be burnt. And so we had in literature, we had decadentism, who always talked about death attraction for that, and
So the destruction of traditional established values, or the recreation
a
of these values,
recreation, but without saying,
without
well,
without
what will
substitution.
come next? And so fascism, Mussolini, I think, not fascism, because fascism is a creation of Mussolini, smelled what was happening all around him.
Also, speaking about, let's say, futurism, Matteo, we can look at one of the contrasts in the fascist ideology, which was, on the one hand, this love for futurism, machines, steel. Mussolini once said, hopefully the time will come when we no longer speak with the pen, but with symphonies of steel machines. And so this love for technology, for hard, cold steel, but at the same time, we had to have these traditional family values in which women were relegated to baby-making machines, and you had to have the farming values of the patriarchy and so on. So another contrast in this
A big contrast,
patchwork of ideology.
patchwork. This is a patchwork because he thought of a nation built by farmers and warriors, and but and when he went to war, we had not the machines, we not aeroplane,
We
we
were
had
totally
no
unprepared.
industry, we had bayonets and farmers, really. So it's quite strange. It's a really patchwork of ideas. We can not easily put them together. It's not a current,
It's not a coherent
coherent
ideology, but
ideology. Maybe it took what he needed because farmers and family values was very useful for the church to have support from the church, industry, and the buildings. The building of a future made of technology was a strong support to the industrial
yeah, for the
elite,
industrialists, and
which
yes, exactly, for
gave
the
him lots of support during
yeah,
his.
for the bourgeoisie of the cities, let's
Yes,
say. So he was able to appeal to them on the one hand with the futurist values, and on the other hand the traditional
yeah.
farming values.
So we can say as what fascism is a creation of a man who wanted to rule, and he took what he needed to rule, to follow his path. But the ideas stuck together are not
They're
so
not always coherent, and
correct.
sometimes they cancel each other out. So, yeah, Matteo, I think that's a great definition. So we can give our definitive definition of fascism as the actions and then ideas of a man who borrowed from various sources and from various experience to create a patchwork that then became one of the most dangerous ideologies in the 20th century.
Yes, in some way, what happened to fascism is not due to Mussolini. It's a creator that, just like the golem, he became
It,
something he couldn't control
Well,
himself.
exactly. Already, and then again, we'll have the opportunity to talk about it in a later episode. Already in 1925, we see that Mussolini started, in part, to lose control because the fascist laws of 1925 were something which was almost imposed by the more extreme wing of the fascist movement on Mussolini himself.
In
So,
some way, he started something he couldn't control in some time of his life, and he went out of control most of the time. I'm telling this not to say he was unaware of what was happening. He knew everything. He chose what to do. He knew what was happening, but in some way, he followed what was happening, and he followed the wave.
yeah, he adjusted to the wave of what was
And
happening.
without it could stop the fascists from the drift of being so criminal in some way. It began as a criminal regime.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Well, even before it became a regime, it was a
Yes,
criminal
it began,
organization.
but he could do something to stop what was happening. But he decided
To let it happen.
to let it happen. So he's responsible. I think it's not we cannot justify him. He was more responsible of what was happening because he could do something.
You could have done, well, again, the eternal debate. Those who just stand by and let things happen are often as guilty as those who are performing the actions as they go
He
along.
had the power. He had the power to stop it, but he decided to
He
go
chose
on.
not to.
He chose not to. He decided to execute his son-in-law. He chose the racial legislation.
Yeah, 1938, the racial laws. Yeah.
He decided to follow Adolf Hitler. He was free to do what he wanted, and so his responsibility are enormous, total. Is unforgivable.
Yeah, we can say just because Mussolini didn't always guide the situation and sometimes he just reacted, that doesn't make him any less guilty.
Not at all. Not at all.
We hope you found that first conversation on fascism interesting. Just to fill in the blanks, Umberto Eco sets out 10 points to give his definition of fascism. Number 1, the cult of tradition, usually rooted in a specific chosen or elected ethnic group. Second, the purpose of fascism is to guide the gut instinct of the so-called people, without question or doubt, and to detest the principles of critical thought. Point 3 is a contempt for culture and the educated elite classes. Point 4, the fact that disagreement with the message of the leader is akin to treason. There can be no discussion. Those who do question the leader open themselves up to insult in the best of cases. Point 5, racism. Starting, however, from those who represent external factors such as immigrants, homosexuals, dissidents, etc. Point 6, taking advantage of the social and individual frustration of certain classes in difficulty. Point 7, nationalism as a unifying factor for those who don't have a social identity. This nationalism requires a constant enemy, such as minorities, foreigners, presumed elite groups, and hypothetical international conspiracy theories. Point 8, pacifism is considered collusion with the enemy, since life is all about a constant, violent struggle. Number 9, all citizens should be members of the one single party at all levels of society. And number 10, the people are a single entity that expresses a single will as interpreted and communicated by the leader. Join us again on the next episode of Fascism 100 when we explore the early life of Benito Mussolini up until his rise to power in the 1920s. Remember, if you so wish, you can get in touch. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com. At the same URL, you can click through to our social media and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Let us know what you think about this mini-series. We're really interested in hearing your opinion. Fascism 100 is researched and recorded by me, Mike Corradi, and Matteo Marconi. Music by Fabio Debbi. Look him up on his YouTube channel. Until next time, thank you for listening and keep resisting.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.